Welcome, folks, to Strong Towns Ask Strong Towns Anything. And really, we do want this to be about any of the different challenges that you face in your community as you continue to engage with the very real practical things that are needed in order to make our places prosper. In this context, we just finished up a little conversation too about many of the competing sort of priorities in our municipal governments and the challenges that we face there as we begin to peel back some of the layers and recognize that there are many sort of overlapping and often contradictory ordinances that one of the roles of a strong citizen is to actually be able to gently point those things out, work locally with people in positions that have the responsibility to make those changes and bring that about. So that will be just a fraction of what we talk about in today's session, including questions around housing, transportation, tax increment districts is a question that got submitted. And as always, if you are interested in joining us, become a Strong Towns member, become part of this Strong Towns movement, and continue to build up more and more resources for your community as well. With that, our first question, I'm going to throw over to Edward, but also invite other participants to jump into this as well, is a question. Saeed is from Ontario, so this is going to be familiar to you. And I lived in Ontario for a number of years as well. But this was submitted by a member who said, in our province, the provincial government has been uploading authority from municipalities to the province. They used to do this with the Ontario Municipal Board that would basically have the responsibility to hear developer appeals of local government decisions. And this is actually something that's unique to Ontario. I haven't come across other municipality or other regions, that had this, where if a municipality made a decision on a zoning determination and the development process was stalled as a consequence of it, they could actually appeal to the province and the province would intercede. It's actually been shifted since that time, but even still, what's happened is that developers are now in a position to tell communities, you must approve what we are presenting to you. Otherwise, we're going to appeal to the province and then it will be rubber stamped by a province that is deemed to be pro-growth, and as a consequence, the terms will be even more favorable to the developer when they come there. Edward, and then perhaps to some of the others, what is a Strong Town strategy here? He's the questioner is saying, I'm a bit stuck on how to act locally when the power is centralized.
Yeah, this is always really interesting, and I'm going to relate this back to something that I think not a zoning thing, because zoning is so and development is so ambiguous when we start talking about those pieces. So in the United States, generally what happens is that somebody makes a determination on zoning. It's either a staff determination or a planning commission determination. And then if you don't like the determination, you can appeal it. And the appeal generally goes up the chain of command at City Hall. So there's maybe it is reviewed by, if it's a staff, to the Planning Commission, but it ultimately shows up at a Board of Zoning Adjustments. So citizens reviewing this on that determination. If you don't like that and you want to appeal that, it goes to the courts. The courts are the worst place for zoning because judges don't understand all the things that planners have baked into the system. It just so it's kind of an uneven even keel. Let's take it out of that context because very few people get that, but a lot of people understand roadways. And I hear this a lot when I am a city and there's a state highway, even if it's two-lane road to the middle of town, we can't seem to do anything. We actually can do a lot of stuff with that. What we have to do is we need to understand the system in which we're operating. So there may be some um, preemptive actions that are being taken at a higher subsidiary than your city council, at a province or at the state or at a county level that is impacting your decision making. But I assure you, there is always some sort of workaround. You need to really understand what the preventative action is being taken, what the superseding thing coming in is being taken over. When it comes to roadways, when local governments want to be able to do stuff on state highways, in my experience, what I found is that at the city, we could apply for the same permit that a developer could apply for when they want to put access to a roadway, when they want to connect into the pipeline. At the city, I could make that application for an improvement. My application was always more favorable at the city level coming forward than a private developer because the person at the state highway department is somebody I knew. It's somebody we were working on. Every month we got together at the MPO or we got together in a round table with planners. We complained about the same developers out there. So we had this like kinship and we both were in local, in municipal or in government. So we're both public servants. So we had some commonality to it. And we could have very frank discussions because that was easy to have a discussion in one of these meetings we were at than for each of us to write reports and letters back and forth. So we can massage where these things were at. To actually get the action moving forward on many of these, if we were willing at the city to take responsibility for the project under the permit and then fund the work, we could move that forward. So really understanding who is making those decisions and finding the like kinship to it. It may mean that your elected officials have to go and kiss the ring. They may need to go and meet with those other officials at their level at whatever circle they're in. That is just so if there's some sort of political right-left divide, we need to step back from that and speak above it. And we're talking about our community and we're moving forward to talk these things forward. So opening that communication and then also think like a developer. Developers seem to figure out all the gray zones. They figure out where the fringes are. They figure out how far they can push before they get slapped back. That same thought process is what we can be doing at that local level, moving these things forward. So there's lots of ways for you to work through that when you understand the operating system. So, Sadi, I hope that helps. And if there's other pieces that are like, here's what we really are stuck on, happy to kind of walk through how I would think through that process and leveraging everything I can do at the local level because it's very easy to legislate from above,
Yeah.
but the actual implementation and making it happen is really hard. And that's what we are good at that local level, at local municipal government. And it's a matter of kind of like threading the needle through this crazy maze.
Yeah. And Stephen, who asked the question, is in Markham, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. And it is interesting. I mean, to pick up, I dropped a note in the chat about the concept of subsidiarity and the recognition that the decision needs to be taken by that level of government that is best suited to make that decision based on the amount of impact that it will have. And one of the challenges in Ontario and so many other places is that by local governments refusing to take action on things like housing, on things like allowing neighborhood development of retail, things like this, they've created many of the broader crises that are now sort of overflowing into productivity crisis, shortages, housing shortfalls, all of the other pieces that are certainly there. The other thing that I would also encourage Stephen to consider is being directly able to contact either the developer themselves or becoming someone that just connects ahead of time and saying, I like this project, but I'm concerned about these areas. Would you consider some adjustments? Some of them will just totally blow you off, but many times they will say, oh, that's interesting. You're willing to have that conversation. I've, had a few lunches covered by a developer, and I always say it's not going to affect how I advocate for this. But when we've talked about it, even I can't take too much credit for it, but one of the suggestions was, can we have smaller scale retail to allow more local businesses? And they said, that is in consideration. We'll take that up. Another one where it was encouraging them to do more with patios that would better front the street and do a better job of not just having a blank facade facing the street. And they took that input, and then they can also speak as part of their application process. We have engaged with community members and actually gotten feedback that we are now incorporating. So don't want it to all be theater, but I do think that there's value in taking those steps up. Maybe related to this, actually, it's a great question here from David for Edward. And then more broadly as well, if anyone has experience with form-based code. But David just said, hey, form-based code, what's a strong town's perspective on it? Or Edward, as an architect, as a trained architect, I should say, what are your impressions of sort of the pros and the cons of form-based codes and the efforts that are being made on that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I administered a form-based code, and I in multiple ways. Here's here's some of the traps that are falling with form-based codes. The the good thing with a form-based code is it recognizes where we are in the urban spectrum because something on the edge of town has different qualifiers than the Main Street building. So the fancy term for that is a transect. But when you show that, and especially when you draw it with the buildings and characteristics of your community for calibration, that's something people understand. Defining those as T zones also takes away all the baggage that you have with Euclidean zoning. So when you take away all the baggage of highway commercial and high density residential or low density residential, these are abstract concepts. So when you go and you do T zones, you're connecting to the relationship within the city. I found that citizens were more open to hearing about what was in a T zone than hung up on the term of a T zone, if that makes sense. If I would go in and somebody wanted to do apartment building and we're going to rezone it to medium density residential, oh my gosh, medium density, that's bigger than my home. If I'm talking about we're going to do something in a T4, it was in context with it. And because they didn't know what T4 was, they were more open-minded to hearing how that worked, and they can make an informed judgment of whether or not it was contextual. I also like the form-based codes because they're illustrative and they focus on form first. So on the hierarchy, it's an illustrative thing. It adds predictability. Now, if you're a zealot in the zoning world, a big zoner on this, there's typologies and forms and frontages and all different types of ways people have subsetted that out. I basically found that a simple box of what you can build, if you can fit it within the box, you can move forward. So don't get caught up with all the other stuff. I mean, you can, but that's not necessary. And the form-based codes, the some of the earlier ones, some of the stuff coming out from the smart code and some of the other form-based code documents, showing those where your zoning determination is on a single page. So when you look at the zoning for a building using form-based codes, you have you setbacks, all those components on one sheet with an illustration showing you all the pieces and numbers on the other side of how it's been calibrated to your community. That is something that every builder and planner can put on their drawings, and everybody at City Hall can just simply go across the table and the development reviews I would do with that simple form could be reviewed in a matter of minutes because it was a single sheet. Where form-based codes start to fault is that we get overly complex with the language. We migrate to building typologies. The other place they start to fault is that we fall back into our Euclidean zoning, our complicated systems.
Right.
So we still have 25 steps to get stuff approved. Uh, we make it even more so. Okay, now we have the form-based code. We have when I was in Florida, we had subcommittees and communities that had to review before it moved forward. The work I did in Ranson, West Virginia, they established the hierarchy of reviews. So the first thing is if you were in the middle of downtown, you did not have to go through a site development review. You didn't have to go to the planning commission. You built to the form approved by right. If you were doing a new subdivision or expansion of the city over a certain size, you had to do the rezoning, which was an 11 by 17 document that could be done in 3 pages. It went to a public hearing and identified an intensity of the development.
Mhm.
You then had to submit a master plan, and they have a complicated term for it in West Virginia called a land development plan and plat. But it is a master plan that could be done in 7 pages. Each 11 by 17 sheet page outlined intensity. So where you've picked a neighborhood side, where's the center? Where are the edges? Do we see that transect layout? Where are the streets? Do you have a network of streets, block sizes? Where are the parks? Like all of those pieces. So in 7 to 10 pages, you could show your whole project. And if you couldn't make page one work, the rest of it fell apart.
Hmm.
So it simplified it. In that process, we were able to do hundreds of acres of entitlement in Ranson in less than 3 months. And that was the last of the public hearings. Everything beyond that, the construction drawings, the roadway work, the drainage, the building plans, all of that was directly by staff. And we simply were checking the performance standards that water went downhill, water was treated, roadways matched the conceptual designs and the plans, the plats matched the blocks. Again, we could review those plans for the most complex construction drawings in about a week. So we could turn those things around quickly. I described it as um, making the good easy, is how we kind of conveyed that forward. And we gave the hierarchy of where the public was engaged and where it made the most impact. So form-based codes, I think, are really great. There's lots of great examples out there, lots of great firms doing it. It aligns with the thinking through where Strong Towns has talked about an adaptive code, allowing the next increment by right. Where it becomes a little edgy on this is where we make it overly complicated, or we assume the form-based code is just like any other zoning code, where we're going to build to a finished state, or we're going to require the development team to build all the infrastructure up front. So on the implementation is where it starts to diverge from what we would advocate for at Strong Towns. But using that for infill downtown areas, I found it to be an easy tool because you got all of the complicated stuff out of the way first. Like the front door has to be on the front of the building.
Right.
Like that's
Step
the
one.
first thing on the code. The
Mhm.
parking has to be in the rear. That's the second thing on the code. Like that's the biggest debate I'd have on every infill building in town. So getting that laid out very early and having an illustration, I could then take the illustration, the code of a box, put on a page, draw up a site, move their building around on it to make it look like that code, and show their engineers and planners how to achieve their project. So it became a great tool for that. So that's a lot of stuff. I don't know if that's triggering or if there's other issues you're coming across on those.
David, you want to jump in?
No,
Okay.
that that
Because oh, go ahead.
that's a great help because the articles you have referred me to are very helpful, and so I'm going to try to gin up for our planning commission and our new town council maybe a primer on form-based codes.
Mhm.
And so these will give me those ideas to do that, unless you have other suggestions, Edward. But that's a big help. I know a little bit about it, and so I've seen other examples, but not recently. So this I just wanted to refresh my memory and that's going to spur me to do some posts about that. Thanks.
Yeah. Um, Placemakers,
Yeah. Yep.
DPZ, Dover Coal,
Right.
Opticos, they
Yep.
all have great resources on it. Um, I don't know if they still have I think they took down the Ranson site, but there's lots of places where they go through that process.
Yep.
The key is really looking, when I look at the smart code, which is a document that's available, you can download, it is not something just to copy.
Right.
It is intended to be a tool to calibrate. But if you look at the sections when it like dive into it, it's probably like the third or fourth chapter when it comes to the buildings. That single sheet that shows the series of boxes of where the building fits in each of the T categories. I presented, Alan Feinberg had me present up in Frederick, Maryland when I was working in Ranson, and we met with their planners, and like they were in this friction in like, how do we build buildings in Frederick? And it's like, this shouldn't be hard. You have two buildings here and you tore one down for a parking lot, and now you want to put a new building in. just build to that phase. And the
Mhm.
planners couldn't get that. And it's like, well, let's lay the box out of what it would look like. And I said, look, in Ranson, I didn't have all the planning staff. I didn't have all the sophisticated developers. We were being
Mhm.
run over by the Washington development teams. We
I
were
know
being,
that feeling.
yeah. So here's this simple thing. We have one page. When you tell a development team you build by the code, that means you can get that move forward in a very fast way because we've determined what we need to do, and we've cut out the public um, process of everybody showing up and complaining about it. We've already done that work for you. That gave me a lot of leverage with the development teams because I took out all the risk of their projects.
Yep. Yeah.
And they could do an easy pro forma on the box to figure out
Hmm.
and then they could battle with their architects of how many stairs there are going to be and all that stuff. But that led to like quick reviews, predictability to it. And our debate would be of the hundreds of things you could debate on a project, it usually be down to one or two items. And they were things that we had in our form-based code that staff had some authority to be able to have some flexibility with that. And it's the simple things with like we had some flexibility with setbacks and we had some
Hmm.
flexibility in how many trees you put in. So all the weird things that come on a site. But yeah, that's if you're working through that and you get stuck with technical folks that don't get it, I'm happy to help talk to them or introduce you to folks in the area that are administering and doing this work because it's really way simpler than it ought to be.
Mhm. And
Thank
maybe
you.
that's an element of
Big
it is
help.
that as you design those elements, you need sort of, I'm Dutch, so I can say this, and I've lived around enough Scottish people. You need a couple of people that are pretty spendthrift to really be mindful that it's not getting into like, hey, what is the material of the garbage can out front? What is what type of canvas are we allowing for the awning? And you see some of these codes become sort of Disneyfied is the criticism just because of if a good thing is good, let's have more. And that's where I love Grayson Johnson's praise of background buildings. There's an article that I've linked there in the chat because
Mhm.
she just says many of the times we just need these buildings to be functional. However, functional in the suburban development pattern is like bare bones, you know, doesn't navigate well with the streetscape, and ugly is amplified by bad site planning, by bad sort of layout, by auto
Yeah.
dominated sort of frontage. And that's a big shift. And so if you have that restrained sort of approach, I think there's something super valuable in that as it goes.
Yeah, and I'll stop after this. We have a little complication because our town of 11,000, the Plata, we have a design review board. And so ever you could only, because you mentioned that they really get down into the color of the signs and the trash can. I mean, it's like, I get it, but it
When I
is.
was in Martin County, Florida, like anti-growth capital
Yep.
in a redevelopment agency, my job was funded through TIF and I was to do urban design work. Um, we had not only did we have all of that, but we had in our 7 redevelopment areas that had not seen any development and were heavily blighted, we had a neighborhood advisory committee that would like hold court on every project. And it was like, look, you all spent a year and a half developing a plan. You all have pictures and you
Right.
told me what you want here. The last thing this developer wants to do is to come in and you tell them how many petunias you want in the front yard.
Right.
We need to allow them to move through that and
Hmm.
with the predictability of it. We also need a message that these zoning codes need to be a fluid living document.
Yeah. Good
So
point.
as development is occurring, there's not a single planning commission in this country. When you think about how much time you spend reviewing plans and debating them, nobody comes in a year later after it's built and do an after action report of it.
Very rarely.
Like it, you usually relitigate it with the next project and you charge them with all the crimes of the first.
Right.
But if we actually took time in our planning commission meetings and said, look, we just approved the new Wawa. It's now built. Let's look at it. Oh, circulation was wrong. Oh, the building siting would be better was this. What rules, what regulations resulted in that decision? Let's look at that. Or we've got this new apartment complex that came in with way too much parking. What requirement resulted in that parking? Because it's too much. Let's look at how it could be different. So that type of dialogue, I think there's a powerful position for our planning commissions to ask really tough questions about projects coming in, not just nitpicking them, but asking the question, developer or planning staff, what is the regulation or policy that resulted in a decision to move the building back from the street or to overpark it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the developers will say right away, well, city staff told me I had to do it. And it's like, my
Right.
God, those are people working for us. Let- Let's change that policy. Let's
Yeah.
provide them reinforcement to update and revise that.
I think
Thank you.
two things stand out with the suburban experiment. One is the neglect of what constitutes good bones for a neighborhood, for a space. What are the good bones of a good downtown became lost, quite rapidly. And then the other sort of trap of building everything out all at once to a finished state is actually the stalking horse for every form-based code, for every type of like neighborhood plan, is that the idea is now it's immutable. And this is even the challenge, David, as you work at this, the idea is many things you don't want to make a decision on because then that planter has to exist where it is because it's in the plan. Or we made a decision that we were going to allow, exactly this type of fronting or this type of glass material, when the reality is, I mean, that might shift after a couple of years, and you want that organic changing and that adaptation as we go along. And so leaning a little bit into some of the absurdities of the tenacious defense of that which previously was approved, I think can sometimes help you in that task as well. But I want to pivot to a question here that Lonnie has asked, which is, when we talk about who a developer is, how are we talking about us being the good guys helping the place we care about and not the evil developer? Certainly, Edward, why don't you start on this one? And then if others have some thoughts on this as well, and then we can open it up to discussion too. But it's a great question. I'll drop a link to Daniel's article on the 3 types of developers. But Edward, why don't you expand on that?
Yeah. So there is so much baggage around the word developer that like it just carry along. And I know there are folks that'll show slideshows and they'll say, when we talk about developers, they're the villains, and they'll show up and you show like Darth Vader. And, and to be welcome in the town, you just need to be a little bit less like dark than that. Like so it's really important to have those dialogues because or the other type of developers and communities that are seen as like the algae level developers are things like home flippers
Yeah.
or landlords, and we add all different types of attributes to that. We need to work a different way of thinking through that, and we need to target and elevate folks in our communities that are making investments. So I get the last 8 decades, we should have that has led to a pattern of development that we should have a lot of apprehension of anybody coming to town saying, trust me, I'm going to build something in your community. Because we've seen the last 8 decades of development coming in that is less productive, less lovable, less likable than was there before. And that doesn't matter if you tore down the mall or plowed under the corn. Like the things that are being built are just less. What we're seeing with incremental developers or small scale developers, these are the individuals that are doing small conversions. They're local in their community. If you want to take the neighborhood evolution course, if you want to do their placemakers course and do their training, they require you to take a solemn oath that you will focus your time and energy to farm your community. Their first step tells you you need to attend every public meeting in your city hall for a couple of months. You need to show up at city council and planning commission so people get to know who you are. So it's really important when we talk about when we talk about developers, we might need to talk about them differently as investors in the community.
Thank you.
Light
That's a good
busters.
word. Yeah.
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 We need to talk about it in the good that they're bringing in the language. We need to elevate up what they're doing, and they need to kind of build a team up. We're doing a lot of work at Strong Towns to communicate this to cities. Our next housing toolkit is on that because there are folks that are making these investments in their towns and they're treating the person that is adding an accessory cottage in the backyard or converting a blighted single family to a duplex, we're treating them the same way as the people bringing the McDonald's to Main Street.
Exactly. The
Treating them the
language
same way
has
as
to
the
change.
Walmart and Costco
Mhm.
developers, and we expect they have the same deep pockets, and they don't. Like these are apples and oranges. So really, really looking at that of community investors, town makers, placemakers, those are all terminology that we should be shifting to for this type of work.
Edward, I used the actual name of my network is the Neighborhood Placemakers and Network. And I was doing that because I didn't want to put the word incremental developer in there in the title because of the baggage around development. But I like the idea of using the language of investment and uplifting the neighborhood. And yeah,
Investment really codes in a different way because
yeah,
I'll often make the joke that infill sounds like something you get at the dentist, and it's bad, sort of poor like planning speak. And what we're actually talking about is Jim investing in his home and Carrie investing in hers, and as a consequence, like another thing being birthed and creating more vitality within the community. And Eric Kronberg has some amazing graphs of what it looks like when just from a population basis, like how much services can you provide in your community if all of a sudden you populate a block a little bit better. And I do want to draw attention too to the article that Daniel wrote on Have You Met This Guy? And it's the idea of like the developer consultant as the person that just greases the skids for the larger developments. And I really appreciated that guy is a tax on small scale development. It's when you need these specialized services to be able to move a project through. It means that anyone who does not play that game is at a severe disadvantage. And, there has to be upside for a developer to hire that guy in your community. And the way that upside is created is through friction, through tension, through delay, through sort of all of the carrying costs that come with having to get a process through the labyrinth, rather than it being a simple walk in, get your plans reviewed. They say, hey, you've cited this in the wrong way. Come back with a better plan based on something like a form-based code or based on just a simple performance standard, and then we're going to move this forward. And so I think that really makes a huge difference. And when Chuck talks about different types of housing product being financialized, the 5/1, the single detached house sort of cul-de-sac neighborhoods, all of that is really grappling with the fact that there are these production style builders that just run from place to place to place, and those aren't super helpful. And this is probably one of the areas where strong towns and yimbys can at times come at in an odd way. We were driving by an area in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and Chuck said, "Look at that! Like that is what 80 units of housing." But it was just plopped right next to an interchange
right.
with no connection to the rest of the community, except for I think there was an Arby's or something, and that was all that was constituted. And yet it was like a net increase in housing stock, but actually no new increase in neighborhood. And so it feels like at times we really grapple with like, are we neighborhood developers or neighborhood sort of investment, or are we
Yeah.
just throwing stuff up and seeing what sticks?
Let me
Yeah.
throw just an image story at you. Well, I used to speak for and was a part of the think tank, the planner think tank in the Bay Area called Spur. And at one of the meetings, there was the affordable housing developer, there was the public housing project developer, it was a fee developer, it was a panel. And during the Q&A at the end, I raised my hand and I pointed at the public project guy and I said, you're like the old mainframe computer that what it takes to layer and do anything takes forever and it fills a whole room. And then I pointed at the affordable housing woman and I said, you're like a PC. And then I pointed at the fee developer and I said, you're the laptop. And then I turned to everybody in the audience and I said, would everybody hold up their phones?
Hmm.
And all the hands went up in the room with their phones in it. And I said, what we need are a whole bunch of these. And I called them nimble housing engines at that time.
Hmm.
This was like
Hmm.
2011. And it brought laughter, but the point was kind of made. I didn't call it the swarm then. He hadn't written the book yet.
Right.
But the same idea, I'm looking to change the conversation both in the neighborhood amongst owners and the neighbors and at the city to understand how vital, nourishing the
Mhm.
small swarm of developers is to what they have to do. Anyway, I'll shut up now and let you.
Well, no, but it's a good point. And when you think of it, what does it take to nourish a small scale developer? Part of it is certainty on project timelines because they can't abide the same amount of flex, of, review time, all of those different types of things like that. And then the other element of it is that reasonableness that says, even with things like setbacks, do you have strict setbacks or relative setbacks so
Right,
that you can
flexibility.
preserve a tree on a yard by allowing some modification of where that foundation is going to get poured, not asking them at the 11th hour to go back and review like a fundamental shift, understanding even how a building gets built in order to understand like at some point you can't meet dropping new demands on them. And yet our municipalities are notorious for this. The
For
planners will
doing it.
suddenly discover at the 11th hour yet another requirement that's there. So
Happened
um,
in my project. Yes, I just
mm,
finished it April 9.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk housing and add a little bit of a we're among Strong Towns members, but Edward, I'm going to put you on the spot. So we published an article last year about the Culdesac development in Tempe, Arizona. And I'm not shying away from any of the controversy because we've actually put it, and I'll link to it here. We actually put a note. This is the only time we've done this where we said it wasn't a good piece. We're going to take it back, and here's a better representation of what Strong Towns is all about. If you're not familiar with Culdesac and Tempe, they've done a car-free development with majority of the units, I believe, available for rent. It's attracted a lot of attention, and we wrote sort of a piece that was, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and it was poorly executed. And the critique was just, well, it's not incremental, therefore, Strong Towns is going to, on a pure sort of like take a knock at it. Edward, do you want to address that? Because someone said, hey, why did we take that down? And does that have anything to do with us, changing positions or changing viewpoints?
No. So we have a pretty broad editorial process at Strong Towns. There is a constant dialogue occurring with our team in all of these types of projects. When you look at this particular project and the focus of the article I wrote on this that really shifted the dialogue across the nation on this work is that it's easy to critique cul-de-sac through our Euclidean or modern suburban development pattern. It's easy to critique this type of project. It's all stick built. There's no parking on it. They've tried a couple different places to uh, take this out. There are other cities they would like to go and take this development pattern out, and they're having trouble getting those pieces off. Um, I could only imagine the amount of zoning hearings and variances in Tempe, Arizona over a project like this. Like rental in a college town next to industrial, and now we're gonna have parking, like all the things. But if I compare this development to our traditional development pattern, that's what they're asking us to be critical of, not in this construct. So yeah, we had a internal discussion about it and said we didn't think the article that we previously wrote, I think that Ben wrote, um, was fair to the project, and it really wasn't that well written on a thing. I think it wasn't that great of a piece. Now, what has occurred from that is that as a result, I think Dwell picked it up and started a broader conversation with it and kind of threw us in the falter, out there to go and try to kick up a fight. And it made us be more critical on the work that we were doing and the writing that we were sharing. That has led to this broader discussion. And now there's a great little PBS review like of cul-de-sac. The national dialogue of this project hits what I think is the most critical point of this project of what happens at a project if you decouple housing and parking. What happens if you break that? And not just parking mandates, but just like totally remove it. what happens? Well, in this case, a very successful project that's able to achieve environmental and affordability and access and all of the things. And for me, frankly, as somebody where I'm sitting, to think that this first type of project like this would happen in the Phoenix metro area where it's extremely hot and everybody likes their cars and traffic is king is fascinating to me. Like, like we should be thinking about this in other places. So, yeah, short answer is we had an editorial review of this and wanted to frame it in a different way that we didn't do a very good job of the first time when we wrote the article. And what I'm excited about is through that reevaluation and explaining it further and celebrating this project, we can show that we have started a broader national dialogue about this.
Mhm.
Because if you look prior to some of the writing that we were doing, there were different angles that they were trying to attach to this. But for me, from Strong Towns, I think looking at this decoupling parking and housing and what the result is. And I think it's a fascinating result that it's bite-sized scale. It actually allows for it incrementally to grow over time on the site by breaking it into smaller buildings. That helps with the affordability of it, delivery of the project. It also allows for solar orientation, so it's a cooler development, hitting all those environmental benefits and creating all of these little tiny nooks and crannies within that development hits kind of the social components to it that people like other people. So providing those outdoor rooms allows for something. So even though the units would be small, you have this outdoor room, like a living room that you can share with your neighbors on it. I find all that to be kind of fascinating. So yeah, there's nothing, don't think that everything at Strong Towns is coming as stones off the mount. Like we are actively thinking and discussing these things as they come about. We're trying to extend that dialogue and think through it. So there's no dogma here. We really are
Right.
thinking through this all the time with our writing and the stories that we share.
And I do think that if it had been a guest post, it likely would have stayed, but it was also published by a Strong Towns writer that was working for us at the time. And so I think that that was an element of it as well. But it does, I'm just reflecting on, yeah, the idea that we, on the one hand, need to really affirm the need for small scale developers to emerge, like you said, Lonnie, sort of these nimble neighborhood investors that are doing that work while also not immediately, being objecting to the idea that there's going to be other types of development that are also going to occur. And many times those can be improved. I look at a place like the Wheeler District in Oklahoma City, where, yeah, that is a large development corporation, with some real insight and vision into what it takes to build a stronger community. And they've gone and done it. And it's a place that I would live in. In my community, we have Southlands. It's a very, invested developer that has shared with me his recognition that a lot of what he previously used to build was deeply flawed. And he said, I regret some of the projects that we've done in the past, but the Southlands development is one that I actually believe, has the vitality that will help it be sustained over the long term. The thing that I've been encouraging them to do is include the idea of iteration within your existing neighborhood. So that way you're not just locking these neighborhoods in as they are for the next 50, 60 years, but allow sort of some thickening up to occur. But that's pretty tricky within our zoning approval system that they have there as well. But yeah, the reduction of outdoor maintenance, conservation of water, preservation of public space, just even the recognition of the importance of shade as a public asset. And I think if we can, I think we've written a couple of times great articles on shade and bus stops, but also just, this is one of my arguments for why trees are actually a transportation investment in most of our climates, is they help people navigate the street in a way that feels more dignified and honorable if they're outside of a vehicle. And so if you don't have to go in an air-conditioned space in order to feel comfortable in your community, and trees are amazing at that. That can really go a long ways. I know we've got just a couple more minutes, but I see that I think Stephen's still with us. Yeah, Stephen, we did take up your question, but would love your particular local perspective on what you're seeing in Markham. And the question, going back to at the very beginning, we had picked up the question of what to do when the province is sort of trigger happy and happy to overrule a lot of the local decision making, and how to sort of factor that in. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? I know we will have some comments that you can watch in the recording after, but go ahead. Oh, do unmute. Yeah.
There we go. My headset is connected both to my work laptop and to my phone. So, I'm at work today unexpectedly. Yeah, no, there's a new that I don't know if you know, for people who aren't familiar, Cadillac Fairview is a huge property owner. They own mostly malls all across Canada. They are redeveloping their parking lots surrounding most of their malls into housing, mostly towers. So there's a proposal in Markham that has been winding its way through the development process. And I've been following it and I've been attending meetings and so forth. One of the comments that is made by city councilors at these meetings is that they are basically their hands are tied, that they essentially feel like they have to approve this development as proposed, because if they don't approve it, then the developer is just going to go to the province and the province will rubber stamp whatever the developer wants. There's something like a 95% success rate for appeals to the province by developers. So, and there's legislation being proposed right now that's going to get passed that is going to make this situation, I don't know if I want to use the word worse, but it's going to make it more centralized. The more and more authority is being taken away from the municipalities. So, our local conversation has really just gotten started, and I'm trying to find an angle to approach action in our community from when decisions aren't made in our community. That's sort of where I'm coming from.
So the question I have there is, why can't the local government and the developer work together? Like,
So that has happened. So that has happened to an extent. The local government did work with the developer to improve the proposal. For example, it went from 50-story towers to 39-story towers, and now there are a few more 6-story apartments proposed for the site. And there's a bit more park space. But all of this is done, not to be violent about it, but the municipality has a gun to its head. Like it's the negotiating position of the municipality is very, very weak.
yeah.
It sounds weird. I know it's
No, so this happens a lot now. My experience has been in Canada, your local municipalities, your city planners have more authority and are able to do more than what we could do in the States. So I could see in the States where there'd be this backseat role. I don't think the city needs to take a backseat role at all. I think
no,
with
well, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
legislatively is the problem, is that we are being
it's only
we're being told.
yeah. So this is like, think about this as a site constraint
Sure.
at the local government level, and I was able to do quite a bit with developers that refused to participate with anybody else. And the way that I could do that is getting in early and often and having frank conversations with them. My mindset at City Hall had to change from a regulatory individual to master developer for my city. So
Okay.
when you think about the development, that developer needs to make revenue. The amount of revenue they're going to make on the project is actually not as much as we would think. It's only a small
Yeah.
percentage of return. As a city, we also need to make revenue in this investment. There's also things that we want in the city. So finding your local sensitivities to height and open space and all of that. If I think about like the tower discussions that have occurred architecturally in Toronto and Vancouver, like that's where you get the block with the lower level and in the middle the spike towers. At the street level, you never observe those large towers. At the
Sure.
street level, the planners have taken all the time in the world for that public realm to be fully designed, positively contributing back to the city. So, in a design like this, when we look at these various designs in this work, um, I can tell just by the little things that Norm is sharing at the ground level, it's terrible. And what we're asking the developer to do is cut back on program, which is impacting their bottom line. If the city went in and was really clear about what they was important to them in development, and if the city thought about the financial return on this, the long-term financial return that this investment was going to make for the city, we could then take the 100 things that we're upset about. We could take the white flag and put it in the drawer, and we could target on maybe the 10 things that there'd be some friction. And it would actually prevent us from having to see that appeal go up where we actually lose all power. Yeah, just to finish up on that, I think cities have way more authority to take action, to have a real dialogue with developers that will break through that. I think that is something they have the power to do. That has to happen early and has to happen often, and they can mutually benefit from development in their communities.
Mm-hmm. Because you can see in the design that they have offered here, this is not a template development. They've had to adapt it to the site plan. They are using templates for some of those buildings that are situated there, but you can even see that they've staggered it to basically mimic where the existing neighborhoods are. It does step up in height. However, there's probably a lot of things that they could do with a really excellent site developer, like, and get some new urbanism going on. And you can see that in some of these, like, they'll call it a muse, or they'll call it, sort of these areas that are better sited or better situated for it. But the question is, where is the transit orientation? Where is, what are you doing at each of these sites in order to make it a pass through? Are you creating opportunities for other types of public services to emerge in these spaces? And then over time, what are you going to do with the core, which is that existing mall site? But I am generally quite pro mall redevelopment, especially in places like Markham where there is transit and it is possible to be able to bring in more of the necessary things that you can, concentrate in an area with a view of establishing a village core at this site, at this location over time. But we'll have to get there. So just a programming note, next week, we are hosting another discussion about all of our questions related to the finance decoder, bringing back Mitch Durand-Wood. And I'm going to ask if Linda can join us as well. I think we are still in the works of creating an Excel version of the budget decoder or finance decoder for that. But it's been awesome to see how that's been picked up by a lot of members and local conversations and even random folks that are discovering the stuff. So come back with questions related to that for next week. And then the following week, we will do a regular session again. And then the next week after that, when we are at the Strong Towns National Gathering, we won't run an Ask Strong Towns Anything sessions during that week. But Danny, Jane, Donna, Troy, Max, so good to hang out with y'all. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day, folks.
Thanks, y'all.